here with Sarah, and her topic is bisexuality, which is awesome because we're both bisexual. Okay, so my first question for you is why is bisexuality problematic for both queer and heterosexual slash normative groups?
So bisexuality is problematic for both of these groups because both normative heterosexual and queer communities adhere to monosexuality.
Oh, and could you define what monosexuality is, please?
Sure, so monosexuality is the dominant assumption that a person can only be attracted to one gender.
Mm.
So bisexuality does not adhere to compulsory monosexuality because using any definition of bisexuality, it's an attraction to more than one gender. Um, so, because of its inability to adhere to monosexuality, um, both the normative and queer communities have an interest in erasing or making invisible um, bisexuality. So, for the normative group, the straight interest in erasing bisexuality lies in the desire to maintain heteronormativity.
Mm.
So bisexuality is seen as a threat to the straight community. And this is based in fear of non-monosexuality being inherently promiscuous and over-sexual. So then there's a fear of the transference of HIV from the quote infected gay population to the quote unaffected straight population. So there's a fear of like heavy quotes tainting the
Mm.
pure like normative community. So in that, um, heterosexuality has an interest in erasing bisexuality.
Okay, okay.
Uh, Queer communities tend to erase bisexuality because it is not opposing heterosexuality. So, in its sometimes perceived semi heterosexual nature, bisexuality isn't dismissing all heterosexual privilege in a way, which
Mm.
it's not, but you know. Um, so, then in this case, bisexuals aren't like gay enough to be included in the queer community. Um, yeah.
So, how does bisexuality, how can it be used to destabilize identity categories? And what are the consequences of its perception? And where do those perceptions come from?
So I'll start with the first one. Bisexuality can queer binaries through its ability to exist in a liminal state between and amongst heterosexuality and homosexuality. Um, so the definition is also very unstable, much like the definition of queer. So it makes an ideal identity category to examine when you're attempting to further destabilize identity categories because there is no defined bisexual category that's like static across the board, um, which makes it a neat lens to attempt to queer identity categories because it already is destabilizing sexual binaries. Um, the perception of bisexuality in public, um, bisexuality has several stereotypes attached to it um, that mostly emerge from its inability to adhere to monosexuality. So, two of the largest stereotypes of bisexuals are the hypersexualization and promiscuity of bisexuals, and the fact that it's not a fact, but the assumption that bisexual identity doesn't exist. Um, so, for the first one, the hypersexualization of bisexuals, the stereotype emerges from assumptions that because of its inability to adhere to monosexuality, bisexuality is inherently more sexual, uh, which is not true. It's just the same amount of sexual as any other identity. But that is a presumption, not presumption, that's not a word, assumption that is seen a lot in media still today. And this also kind of goes hand in hand with bisexuality's assumed promiscuity, which stems from like insecurities about bisexuals inability to quote like pick a gender of attraction. So once again, the promiscuity is linked back to not adhering to monosexuality. The second, like, most common stereotype with bisexuality is the invalidation of it as an identity category. So this largely stems from both queer and heterosexual communities' desire in erasing it. It also stems from its inability to adhere to monosexuality. So bisexuality is invalidated for both men and women who are bisexual, but in different ways. So bisexual men are often assumed to be really gay, or gay but claiming bisexuality to attempt to maintain some heterosexual privilege, whereas bisexual women are assumed to be really straight and are performing bisexuality or performing an attraction to people other than men for the benefit of their potential male suitors. So bisexual women are seen to claim bisexuality to impress men.
What was something that really stood out to you in your research on bisexuality as a bisexual person?
Something that stood out to me was how bisexuality is made invisible through different types of fashion and appearance. So something that was interesting to me was that both gay men and lesbians have a very specific, stereotypical, but specific appearance with which they can use to create community, because appearance and aesthetic is a display to some degree of queer identity. So in that way, dress can create community, but because of bisexuality's not fully gay or fully straight nature, there's no definite bisexual aesthetic.
Except for the cuffed jeans.
Except for the cuffed jeans, I guess.
Which is recent.
Yeah. So often bisexuals are kind of forced to change their appearance to either seem gay or seem straight, because there's no just bisexual identifiers in public. So that's what I found interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, Sarah, and sharing that with us.
Thank you.